Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at Attack on Titan Season 4, specifically episodes 81 through 87. A quick clarification, I believe on my watch schedule I had put 81 through 86, which was a mistake. If you've been watching through based off of that watch schedule, I just really wanted to make it known that I did watch all the way up until right before you get what are like the movie versions of the episodes, and I just didn't want anybody to be spoiled by anything that I talk about here today. So getting into specifics though, I don't know where to start. I feel like maybe I should just go through my notes as I typically do, but there's just so much going on and there's so much theorizing that I feel is going on in my head right now. So I kind of want to start with those things and then I'll get into specifics. One of the theories that I did write was one of the first things I had in my notes actually. So the idea of a common enemy for the entire world to unite against is something that gets stated by Dot Pixis within the Trost arc. And by the way, I hate that our characters had to fight against the characters as Titans because of stupid Zeke, and I really I'm upset. I want to blame everything on Zeke, even though I feel like there are other enemies in the show and other antagonists, and there are entire systems of oppression that lead to people trying to rise up, and then they also enact violent things upon others, and that's a big part of the themes of the show. But anyway, I just want to concentrate it all at Zeke, but I'm gonna not do that for today, I promise. But regardless, anyway, I'm already getting off into a bunch of different directions. So I was sad. That was my point. I was sad that our characters had to fight the people that they used to know who had consumed the wine. I just wanted to make sure I got that mentioned. But anyway, within the Trost arc, however, there is a part where there's almost like this lull in the battle, and it's when Dot Pixis actually has the most amount of screen time that he pretty much has for the entirety of the show. Otherwise, you get him in bits and pieces, sometimes with Erwin, sometimes here toward the end when they're discussing what they're going to do when it comes to trying to reach out to the outside world, see if they can have allies. But you do get a decent amount of Dot Pixis within the Trost arc, and he is talking to Eren about the idea that there at one time was this idea of having this common enemy that would unite the world. And I remember at the time, or potentially later, I was wondering, how does Dot Pixis have some of this information? Are these just remnants of things that people were able to have that the king did not wipe out from their memories? I wasn't sure, but it is something that was told to Eren when Eren was really young. And I've wondered if this is something that's been percolating in his head. So the theory that I have, I put theory, unite the world against a common enemy, and then I put Dot Pixis / Trost. I do wonder if this is a situation where, based off the idea of being able to somewhat see into the memories of other individuals that would have the Titan, if Eren has ultimately always been led in a certain direction, and if him being led in that direction is a result of what he's always wanted, or if it's a result of what you see the original Ymir wanted, or if it's a combination of both. I've been saying, as we've been getting to this point here, that I kind of think that Eren feels as though where Eren ends and Ymir begins feels like it is undefinable. You can't really determine exactly where that is, and I also just think that this is kind of devastating in a sense, because so much of his character is rooted in trying to have freedom. And I even mentioned, I think last week, the idea of free will as well. And I feel that those things are certainly within each other and that they are a part. You can't really have freedom without free will, and you can't really have free will without freedom. So they're rooted in each other. And is Eren just this extremely tragic character that ultimately actually never had any free will because he's been influenced since the time that we were first introduced to him? I I don't know, because it almost feels as though he thought he had free will and that he was acting on his own, and it allowed for him to have this bravado in a sense, because he was always so angry and so like, I'm gonna get them, and he was really over the top. He wasn't really like the quiet, let's think for a second kind of character. He was like, no, we have to do this, always going forward. And it sort of seemed almost at times counter to the way everybody around him was acting. So it does make me wonder if this entire time he was able to have this sense of free will when in actuality he never had it. And then it was only once he touched Krista's hand and he got glimpses of the future that he started to realize that he's never had it. And if that just in a way sort of like took all of Eren out of the equation because he just succumbed to this predetermined fate? Is that what's been happening this whole time? Because if so, that is so sad. It's so sad to have a character like represent or want to represent this ideal and fight for this ideal only to be actually tied down to the very opposite thing. And also when you get Ymir's backstory and you realize that she was a slave, there is sort of this, did Ymir, if it's her that's somewhat controlling things, and I would imagine the motivation would be that so she could someday finally be free of this that has been placed on her, not just through when she was alive, but also the fact that everybody can kind of force things of her with her capabilities. So is it that she's been trying to bring Eren to a point where they would finally make contact and then she could actually physically be free finally? And did she sort of almost like allow for him to believe he was free because she never had that? And in a way it was like, I'm gonna give you this gift of thinking that you have free will, but you don't, but I almost need you to think you do so that it instills in you this fighting spirit that I didn't have. I mean, it's just really interesting to dissect, but also I feel is not a thing that anybody can actually answer. I think it's going to be one of those things that's very up for interpretation. I do want to add, I've said a couple times here and there, but for anybody that doesn't know, or maybe start hopping into these analysis reaction type of videos later on, I didn't know anything about Attack on Titan when I started. I didn't know anything except that the ending has mixed feelings among fans. And what I think is kind of funny is I 100% can see why now. It is getting to a point where a lot is up for interpretation, which I like. No, I don't always like it. I don't think I'm of the mindset that any story that means everybody's having conversations about like, wait, but does it mean this? Does it mean this? Basically that if it's up for debate, that means it's automatically brilliant. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea. I think it depends on how you do it and the evidence that you lay out. Because if you don't provide enough evidence for people to have their own thoughts and opinions and perspectives, then it just feels like a cop-out because like you didn't actually know what you wanted to do with it, which I don't think is the situation with this. It feels intentional, especially when I think back to a lot of what we've been getting throughout the entirety of the story, especially the opening with Eren just kind of waking up. And anyway, what would be funny to me though is if I was getting around to like Eren kind of is descending into, in a way, ultimate villain, but again, like, question mark, is it really him? You know. But it'd be funny if I was getting to this point and I'm like, so why don't people like the ending? What's the big deal? I mentioned, though, that I do think that since the beginning there have been things laid out. The opening is one of them, and I remember in the opening, at the time, I was like, okay, maybe he does have a reason to be upset. But in the opening, he consistently was like, I want to be free, I want to be free. And I remember thinking, what are you talking about? A little bit, because I was like, I mean, I understand that the threat of Titans is oppressive, but up until obviously when you see what we then discovered was Reiner and Berthold. Before that point, though, Eren's life was, it would seem, kind of comfortable. And what you see in that first episode before the attack was leading me to think, why is he so angry? What is he? Because he kept going on about, I want to be free. And I remember thinking that that was very odd. So this is in part why I wonder if there has been something impacting Eren from the beginning, which is why I'm ultimately of the mindset that while it feels almost shocking within season 4, as far as it seems like there's such a shift all of a sudden with like what's going on with Eren, I actually feel like looking back, it doesn't feel ultimately that shocking to me. I feel like there have been things that have occurred throughout that make me feel comfortable saying I don't find this to be out of nowhere. I guess I'll say. And another example is when you see Eren, any time that he has to turn into his Titan form, and then innocent people end up dying as a result, I can't recall a time he ever has seemed remorseful about that fact. So, as an example, I'm not even referring to just within season 4, with when they go and he's with Reiner, and then he turns into the Attack Titan, and there's that fight with him against a bunch of other Titans. I'm not even referring to that. Way back when it's him versus Annie as the female Titan, they do not shy away from showing you what a Titan fight does to the innocent people around. A lot of people end up dying, which you can almost argue are Titans in a sense representing advanced weaponry, because there is this idea of, and that's why Erwin's a complicated character too, of, okay, well, if you're going to justify, like, this had to happen for the greater good, that means you're saying that, yeah, the civilian deaths were worth it, is kind of the takeaway. And those things that are up in the air and that you as the viewer have to grapple with as well. I like that you have characters that grapple with these things, you grapple with these things. They're not trying to tell you necessarily, here's why you're right, here's why you're wrong. But where I'm going with all of this and mentioning that with Eren is, I don't recall him coming away from that fight with Annie being like, oh my gosh, so many innocent people died. I don't ever want to be the Attack Titan again. He didn't know it was called the Attack Titan at the time. But he doesn't seem that bummed out about the fact that a lot of people died during that fight. It was more of just recovering from the fight and then moving forward from there. And then another reason why I feel like this theory of, is Eren, has he really been in control this entire time or not, is that I don't know that I think Eren is somebody who is without feeling, or that he relishes the idea of causing pain to others. When he realizes everything, once he's been captured by Krista's family and they're trying to get Krista to consume him so that they once again have that power back, he's devastated at the idea that he, in some ways, has caused harm, and he ultimately, what he wants is to ensure that there is something better, whether he's alive for it or not. And I think that is his true, I feel like that's the true Eren. And I think that's why he sometimes seems like he goes back and forth between being so angry and then also seeming kind of emotional, is because there are these warring pieces of him. And it's almost a question of, are these pieces of him, or are these pieces of, you could almost say future him, but also Ymir in a sense, and is some of this anger fueled by her. I do also think within this season, the physical representation of Eren at times seeming relatively human, and then at times seeming almost dead-eyed. I don't really know how else to describe it, because you do see Ymir drawn away where she doesn't really have eyes until they make contact, and then suddenly she looks different. But I do feel like he has looked different a lot of the season, not just because he's aged, but because he has that look of not really being a person anymore. He seems disturbing in a sense. Like that scene where he shows up with Mikasa and Armin and he's just staring at them and like holding up his hand. It doesn't feel like Eren. As much as Eren has been very kind of moody this whole time, I wouldn't say he felt moody in that sense, where he almost seems like he has no emotions whatsoever. So I do think that there is a lot to not only dissect, but a lot of theorizing that you can do. I can only imagine for the people that had to wait for every episode to come out, to be getting these in chunks and then having to not get answers for a really long time. Oh my gosh, I think I would be losing my mind. But I don't know that what transpires past this point. All of this is based in this theory of like creating a common enemy. That's why I'm spending so much time on it. I'll get to specifics in a second, but I don't know that whatever transpires within the last almost like 2 movies that are within this are going to be anything that takes me aback, because I don't feel like Eren is Eren anymore, if he ever has been, and I feel that that was made more known to him once he did make contact with Krista, and I feel like that's where that shift happened, where suddenly he feels much less, you could say, normal at that point. It's because he's had to accept that he's never really had free will. Maybe he had it at times, but not entirely. He never will have it. and he has to be locked into this horrible fate that he seems to be enacting right now of just causing the rumbling and then going off to every other place to destroy everyone. Okay, anyway, so let's dive into specifics. So episode 81 is titled Thaw. I did note that I did feel like Gabby is like the new Eren, because I said that in a previous batch of episodes. I'm like, is she like the new Eren? Because she's really angry and stuff. But I do feel like Gabby to me represents the breaking of the pattern. And I talked about that last week in the way in which she sort of has this breakdown, and then she's being uplifted in a lot of ways by Falco, and she's realizing at an accelerated rate that they're not just all, they're evil, we're good, they're devils, but we're like the good ones that we can prove that we deserve rights, basically. She has an accelerated progression of that realization. And I think that Gabby, in having her sort of tie her hair back up in the mirror, and she started in a place where she was really angry, and then getting to this point here, it feels like she's going through this cycle in a sense that Eren went through, but that it's going to break with her generation in a sense. So I'm hopeful that that symbolically is what that is representing. And then also I wrote, whoa, Connie, because, okay, I do want to discuss, I'm getting ahead of myself, I don't care. Connie wanting to take Falco to feed to his mom so that his mom could return to being a person was so sad. It was so sad because on one hand you're like, dude, it's Connie and he's a good guy, but he's absolutely not going to feed a kid to his mom. There was a sense of like, I know that's not actually going to happen because Connie is a good character ultimately, I think. And I don't think he's going to actually follow through with this. I think he's just so lost and he's so badly the idea that for years he's been going to visit his mom in this state is very, very tragic. But simultaneously, if I imagine myself in his shoes, one, I wouldn't feed a kid to a parent of mine in Titan form, just to be clear. I can't imagine that pain at all. I think Connie, to me, is somebody, if he could have sacrificed himself, I'm sure he would have done it. But sacrificing someone else, as we see, like he really considers. I do wonder, I wonder if Armin hadn't shown up, if he would have done it. I don't think he would have done it. I think he was more of just starting to have the intensity where he felt like backed into a corner, so he had to start ascending the ladder, but ultimately I don't think he would have followed through with it. I do have a criticism, which is that Gabby and Falco get over this really fast. They're like, oh, okay, I guess, like, you didn't feed me to this Titan, so we're good now. And they're like sitting, and then Annie shows up and they're like, oh, Annie. And I'm just like, wow, this is very much you know what? We gotta put the past behind us, which in some ways I feel like they kind of do if they're gonna save the world from the rumbling at this point. But at the same time, like, I feel like maybe there'd be some additional, like, I don't know if we can trust that Connie guy from Falco and Gabby. And then when Annie does finally show up again, which we'll get to, I think also there would be a little bit of like, okay, so are you gonna explain, like, what you, like, we know more information now, but I just feel like they were kind of like, well, Annie's here, so time to have Annie join us, which I've been waiting for, but I do feel like we could have done a little bit more. I do wonder, this is one of those situations where I wonder if maybe this gets elaborated more in the manga. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's truly just like, Annie's back, and then they just roll with it. I kind of wonder if it is that. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that was the last note I had for this episode, was like, finally, Annie's back. I do also want to get to the Armin thing, though, because I got ahead of myself with the Connie storyline. So Armin having this moment where he snaps at Mikasa was so sad. It also just goes to show how much Mikasa, even though she turns into this monster, you could say, when she's defending her friends, she ultimately is so quiet. I mean, we know that. She hardly talks. We know this about her. But seeing her just be yelled at by Armin, especially after Eren was like, I've always hated you, or whatever. So she's already had, even though Armin is like, I don't think he really meant that. I think he was just saying that because he was trying to push us away, probably to protect us, you know, that whole thing. Even though she's had that said to her, she just recently had this person that she always is protecting saying these horrible things to her. And then Armin starts just yelling at her. And for some reason, that was much sadder to me, because with Eren's, you're like, okay, well, there's probably ulterior motives here. But with Armin's, you're like, that was a genuine, just, he's so overwhelmed. And sometimes the people that you end up snapping at are the ones that are closest to you. And actually, a lot of times, I might have said sometimes, I think a lot of times there is this, like, I have to keep it all in when I'm in public, when I'm at work. And then you come home, and sometimes it's these people that you love more than anyone who end up bearing, they shouldn't, and I'm not saying, like, that's great or that we shouldn't resist that urge, you could say. Always we should try to be open, but like they're under such different circumstances than us on our day-to-day lives, so I know I'm kind of tying this to real life, but also I don't know what that's like to be in Armin's situation. I'd probably be losing my mind if I was him, and it's just so sad because he doesn't snap at anyone, so for him to snap at Mikasa was devastating. One of the saddest moments, weirdly, of the show for me. And then when his takeaway from that is that he says he's sorry. And then he's like, Erwin would have never yelled at you like that. And then he leaves, and you're like, oh, I've been wondering how this has affected him and how that's been weighing on him. And I think this was a fantastic way to depict that question that he has had throughout all of these years that have transpired since the most devastating arc of the show. But also the best arc. Oh my gosh, was that arc so good. But regardless, carrying on. Armin logically, I knew. I'm like, there's no way Armin's gonna die, and then Connie's mom is suddenly gonna become the colossal titan. Like, that doesn't make sense from, like, good storytelling perspectives. I mean, it's up for debate. Maybe that would have been interesting storytelling to you, so I shouldn't speak of it as if it's an objective truth. But I think it would have been odd to introduce Connie's mom as the colossal titan so far into the story. But regardless, when he is about, I don't know why that wasn't what I knew he was going to do. But when he's like, oh, it's okay, I should have done this before, whatever, like, whatever he says something tragic right before he, like, attempts to jump into her mouth. But, oh my gosh, when he started to do that, I was like, no! And again, even though I knew that's not gonna happen, I still couldn't believe it. And I don't know why I couldn't believe it, because it makes sense to his character, especially when you just get that revelation of how he's felt. But still, I thought that was very devastating. Armin has really, I gotta say, I thought from the beginning that Armin was going to have a lot of potential because of the fact that there were these little glimpses of him being more than just the exposition character. And I was excited to see where his character would go. And I think he has definitely ascended into being one of my favorites. I feel like maybe not my all-time favorite, but he has become a very interesting character. And he is a very interesting version of this archetype. And speaking of interesting characters, okay, so last week, I'm pretty sure it was last week, I was saying that Jean, that I don't know if I've given him enough love. So I'm going to continue to ensure that I give Jean some more love. I adored the way that he, one, was unsettled by Flock and how stupid Flock has been operating the Jaegerists and everything, and his level of savagery, as the one episode was called, and how he does pretend to be one of them, and then that they bring back the whole Jean always misses when they're getting ready to execute Yelena and Anyan Capone, and then he's like, oh, I even wrote my note, Jean always misses, and then the cart titan shows up and takes them and everything. But I absolutely loved that plot line. And then, okay, episode 84, I know I'm jumping around a lot, but episode 84, it's titled Night of the End. And I don't know why, because you, like, do go back a tiny bit to see what the characters, what their plan was and how they executed it. And we do find out that Levi's alive, which I already knew was going to happen. And I did think it was so funny that one of the first things he says is, my goal is to kill Zeke. And I put Levi determined as ever. But anyway, so Hanji, though, at the beginning of episode 84, you see her, like, at the window and she's like, hi! And I just love Hanji so much. Hanji's for sure top tier character. I love her so much. Jean, does not need to turn into a character tier ranking, but I'm just like, Jean surprisingly went up. And Hanji is at the top, and then Erwin, rest in peace, is at the top. Levi, for sure, is at the top. Eren, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, we don't need to get into that again. I did write in my notes, there's a moment where Mikasa, there's just so much happening, as far as the way that like Floch has this devotion now to Eren's plan, and then also Yelena's devotion to the cause that Zeke was representing, and just also just attaching herself to whatever she feels is going to be in the history books, you could say. But I did have a note for Mikasa in particular. I said, is Mikasa realizing how it looks to live entirely for someone else? I do wonder if this is going to play a role in what ends up happening, because obviously they're on their way to basically stop Eren. And a question that arises is Mikasa going to be able to follow through? If taking out Eren is the ultimate decision that needs to be made, is she going to try to keep other characters from doing that, or is she going to assist them? I wrote that note for episode 83 specifically, so I was kind of sitting on this question of, is she realizing what this looks like? And also the fact that Eren was like, you've always been devoted to me, and he says these scathing, horrible things to her. I almost wonder if it was to plant a seed in some ways into her mind of, don't live for me. You have to, in some ways, have your own sense of self. And if she's starting to have her eyes opened to what that actually looks like when you don't. Back to episode 84, though, and returning to Hanji. So Hanji has a fantastic quote. There's this moment where they're all sitting around and she's making them food. And it is very much like the people from Marley and then the people from this island. And it's, you know, you have Jean on one side and Reiner on the other side. Yelena stirs up trouble at some point. But General Magath is being terrible, and he's like, it's your fault. And then they're arguing about whose fault all of this is and how far back does it go. Okay, but in history this happened, and then some of them were saying we weren't even alive, we didn't even know, and it's this conversation back and forth. And Hanji, I think, in a way, summarizes everything so well with this one quote, which is, the general has trouble understanding us. We're weird devils who would give up our paradise to help the very world that wants to exterminate us. Great quote, great representation of Hanji. Also, she's pretty much just always so good at not dwelling in hatred, pretty much ever. I mean, that's never really been Hanji's thing, even towards the Titans, when everybody else sort of viewed them as a thing to hate. She was always coming to the table with a sense of curiosity. And it's interesting that that sense of curiosity and wanting to understand, it came from this, initially it looked like this place of, I just want to have answers, they're so weird and interesting. But she extends that, I think, to other human beings as well. And she pretty much extends it to every living being, always just sort of reaching across and trying to get to the bottom of why things are the way they are, including human beings and their mindsets. I did mention a second ago, so getting to this point, Yelena bringing up Marco. I was wondering if this was ever going to be revealed. And I did think it was notable that Reiner remembered exactly what Marco said in the end. And Jean and him, Reiner doesn't even try to defend himself when Jean starts fighting him, and then Jean accidentally hurts Gabby. And I did really like the following day when Jean apologizes to Gabby. That moment was really sweet when he's like, are you okay? I'm really sorry. And then when he turns to Reiner, he's like, I'm not apologizing to you. I think this is why Jean has gone up for me. He's still very human. He still has certain convictions. He's still, I think, flawed and complicated, but ultimately he just feels really realistic. I really, really like his character. And ultimately he also feels really nice. Jean's, I think, actually kind of secretly one of the sweetest characters. And the fact that he always, again, always misses. I brought this up before in the opening of season 4 when he, well, actually not the very opening because that was Reiner focused, but the opening of Eren's here, oh my gosh, action, that it was the same thing. He couldn't fire the Thunder Spear at that one individual because he still has something in him that says, no, this is wrong. So I do like that he's a person. He's not like, oh, no, a peace and love all the way around. Like, he's still angry at Reiner. And I think that was a nice touch for him to recognize in himself where he needs to reflect, where he needs to adapt, be flexible, and change, and also where he's like, you know what? I think it's justified that I'm upset at you for basically being responsible for killing my friend. I think that's a very natural reaction. And also why I feel the Annie situation, I'm like, I mean, we could have done a little bit more with Annie and some of the other characters, but at least we have this moment, I feel, between Reiner and Sean. The next couple of episodes are more action-oriented. The action is phenomenal, very high stakes. I was quite worried throughout this entire part. If you need a refresher, they have, meaning our heroes at this point, I'll call them, they're trying to get to this airship, and unfortunately, the Jaegerists have taken over this area, so they know if there's any chance of them discovering, meaning the Jaegerists discovering that Hanji and her crew are here, they're going to destroy it because they want Eren to be able to execute his plan. And so it's very high stakes. You're wondering constantly, are all of our characters going to make it out alive? Is the boat going to be destroyed, the ship? If it is destroyed, then what are they going to do? Also, can Flock finally eat it? My goodness. Like, there's a lot of things that are transpiring throughout this. The action is fantastic. I like the way we're utilizing the fights between humans, but also integrating Titans fighting as well. And how you also see what it's like when the Titans are on your side and when the humans are the enemies and they're fighting the Titans that are on your side, because it's like a reversal of roles in a lot of ways, which I did enjoy that. And it just goes to show how much the technology has progressed, because before, Annie alone was almost impossible to take out, but now you have Annie, and you have Reiner, and you have Peak as the cart titan. Eventually Falco enters the fight, and you have all of them, and it's still a struggle. So that, again, just really shows how different the stakes are at this point, and the technology and the means of fighting against Titans. I also will say, when Falco turned into a Titan, I was worried that one of the other Titans was going to die because Falco wouldn't necessarily be able to control himself entirely. I'm glad that that didn't happen. I was surprised at how many of our characters were fine during the scene. Even when Armin was hurt, I was like, I mean, he's gonna heal. He'll be fine. But I thought somebody might end up being harmed. Flock, I'm like, he's not dead. Because he crashed into the water, and I turned to my husband, and I'm like, he's somehow gonna get on the ship. Because their plan at this point, once they realize that they can't just fly the ship off, the airship, they realize, like, we're gonna have to take it to this other hangar and then work on it from there. But I was like, he's somehow gonna come aboard and he's gonna ruin their plans, because he's just that thorn in our side at this point. I was like, he's not dead. I wish he was, but he's not. I did love, and I wrote in my notes, Old Guys Club, Commandant and Magath. I loved pretty much everything about the way they went out. I said that whole scene was great. I like that they didn't even know each other's names, and that was sort of like the last thing within their interaction, and they didn't need to, because they came together, they knew what needed to be done, they knew that they wanted to do what was right for the next generation. They were tired of the world having to fight with all of this hatred, and they wanted to put that aside. These two coming together from opposite sides also to accomplish something toward this greater good, which again ties back, in my opinion, to that theory that we're creating a common enemy, which is, I remember saying during, I think it was during the Trost arc when Dot Pixis said this, I was like, if somehow society created, which that was my curiosity at the time, was, did society create Titans thinking that would unify the world against them? And I was like, if so, that's a really dumb plan. But anyway, which is kind of what I feel like happening right now. So we're using Titans to unify the world. But regardless, I do think that that's tying back to that theory that maybe that's partially what's transpiring with Eren right now. And I think just seeing these two characters, didn't even know each other's names. They don't really know anything about each other. They just know this needs to end, and coming together and sacrificing themselves for that. I thought it was fantastic. Great scene. And then we get episode 87, the last episode before the big finales. And this one is titled The Dawn of Humanity. So I put, the first thing I put was Hanji and Levi look great in suits. I did laugh at the fact that the one person thought that Levi was a child. I don't think I ever mentioned this, but when you're getting flashbacks within season 4 and everybody's getting taller and Levi's kind of like, you brats are all growing too much or whatever, I thought that was funny. Anyway, I also put, with the street thief, that you see Levi saves him, and then the crowd starts yelling about subjects of Ymir, and how even in this place that's supposed to be so advanced, and it's the place across the sea, and it's still a mess, and they still are so filled with hatred, and it just feels like the threat previously was Titans, and now it just feels like the threat is the entire world. Do they ever even have a chance? I thought that was really sad. And Eren, when he is seeing all the refugees, and then there's that sweet moment, though, where they're all having fun together. And then the last moment here, the quote that I have written is, "All the minds of humanity focused on a single purpose." This, I think, is a nice full circle way to kind of conclude this discussion. I don't know what we're gonna get. I think Flock is alive. I don't think he's dead. I think it is up for debate, and I don't know that the show is actually ever going to answer for us, because then it would take away the ability for people to have different interpretations. But I don't know if Eren's entirely in control. I think there's been a lot of evidence when I look back through my notes and I think back through a lot of the events of the show and just what we know as far as the ability to send memories back. I do question whether he's been in control, if he's ever been in control, and how much control he has now. But I think as far as what's going to transpire, I do think that our heroes are going to stop him. They keep talking about, like, Hanji keeps having, like, this is how quickly the rumbling's going to get here, and then this is how much it's going to probably get wiped out based off of the amount of time it takes and stuff. I think a lot is going to be lost, but I think ultimately that our heroes are going to save the day based off of that one particular thing I was noting about Mikasa realizing. I think Mikasa will rise up to the occasion. Levi better not die. I need Levi to kill Zeke. That's like the one thing that I feel I need it to be given to us. I need Levi to get Zeke. And also I would like it if he lived, but also I'm like, would he be more at peace if he didn't, though? Like, if he could join Erwin, you know? I don't know. But I need him to get Zeke. That's all I need. I could see this sad, horrible situation where Levi does get Zeke, but also, like, it ends in him, something happening to him too. I could see that happening. But I just need him to be able to accomplish this. It's like, obviously his main focus, he's alive now and he's hardly spoken. I feel like one thing I forgot to mention is there's that part where everybody's arguing. He's like, everybody's so loud or whatever. He's just like grumpy, quiet, injured Levi. And it's like, yeah, I need him to recover so that he can get Zeke. You know, those like mystical Ackerman abilities need to kick in again, and then he needs to get Zeke. I think Mikasa's gonna get Eren. Did I say Armin earlier? I hope I didn't. Mikasa, I think, needs to, and I think will get Eren, but I think it's gonna be really sad because I don't think she wants to. And I don't know if we're gonna get any actual answers as to Eren and if he's fully in control. But this is where we're left. Yeah, I think that I should have probably already ended it with the all the minds of humanity focused on a single purpose. I was about to say person, which, hey, kind of. But anyway, that quote, I think we'll leave it there. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to only talk about the first of the finale, because there's like the two parts. I'm like, do I only watch the first one and then have a conversation? Or do I watch both and have a conversation? I think I'll probably watch the first and have a conversation, and then watch the second, and then maybe kind of capture thoughts on not just the season, but the story overall. So it'll almost be like a look back / the very end. I don't know, we'll see. Or maybe I'll do the first part and then the second part, and then maybe I'll have to add in a video just being like, okay, I've been thinking a lot, because already just before we've even gotten to the end, I feel like there's already so many questions that I feel there's so many different ways to decide what all of this means and what's actually going on. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. As always, we're almost there. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.
Luna? What you doing? You want to come in? Come inside. No, you're comfy right there. Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna keep working now, though, okay?